All right, everyone. Tim Cook made an impassioned speech the other day about like people who use Apple's platforms for hate and violence and stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, nobody should be using any platform for violence. It's fucking illegal. And if it's a credible threat of like racial violence or something, yeah, okay. But I'm thinking about it this way. Is this coming from the Tim Cook that underpays his workers chronically, or is it from the Tim Cook that employs outright slaves in China and has factories with with suicide nets around it? Or is it the Tim Cook whose company doesn't pay hundreds of billions that it technically owes back into the U.S. collective taxpayers' pot because it uses tax schemes to avoid doing that? Or do you mean the one whose devices include rare earth minerals that are mined in strip mining operations in central China or even in North Korea by people who, again, are largely slaves and serfs? Which Tim Cook is it that's saying this to me? Oh, hate has no place in our platforms. No, unless it's you doing hateful things. See, here's the thing. Here's an admonishment to people who claim to be liberal, because a lot of them, they're only liberal in name. If you call yourself liberal, or you stand for human rights, progress, whatever, you can't possibly believe in a million years that someone with as much money as Tim Cook, who largely has backstabbed his way to the top like any other good CEO, to his credit within a technically capitalistic system, by the way, not a problem in and of itself, you can't possibly believe that corporations are anything but greedy and authoritarian in nature. They cannot be otherwise. It's impossible. If you have a competitive system, the people who have risen to the top will tend to have competed a lot. How do you think that they always play by the book? Do you think that they're always happy, honest people? Do you think that they're willing to endanger their company under burdensome U.S. tax codes when their companies are smaller by not attempting to outsource, by not using tax shelters that Congress has helpfully given them? And I'll tell you another thing. The reason why these corporations get away with such bullshit is because they have more money as a ratio adjusted for inflation than any of the robber barons did back in the late 1800s. If you combined all of the robber baron carpetbagging morons that at the time had tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, which was a lot of money back then, if you combined all of their wealth together, it wouldn't be as high a proportion of total wealth held in the United States or even in the world as Zuckerberg has today, or Bezos or Tim Cook. These people are more wealthy than you can possibly imagine. A person, let's say some of you out there, statistically I've thought about this and it's actually very funny. Some of you are millionaires. You don't have any wealth compared to Tim Cook. He cannot possibly understand reality the same way you do. To him, it is acceptable if a bunch of workers suffer over in China because he's trying to bring a good product to the American middle class or something. And he'll do that and justify it in a million different fucking ways. You want him to be the arbiter of your morality? I think you are absolutely insane. I think people are insane. When people on the left call for Silicon Valley to censor, when they call for them to be the arbiters of what is or is not right, they are lunatics. You are literally making the same arguments that a literal fascist would make, ironically enough. Look up the definition sometime. It has to do with corporatism. You're not talking about, oh, some random person's far right. They've got they have too many guns and they thump the Bible, therefore they're a fascist. No, 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 no. They may be far right. They're not a fascist. This is a totally different story. These people in Silicon Valley started out quite libertarian, and this is the way any business paradigm works too. It's not just within technologies as they flip over time and change, radio and cable and back to the telegram, the non-manual printing press is something, all the way up through the early wave of the internet and now social media, and you're beginning to see the fully interconnected mobile era, I think, arising now too, where, with the 5G network and all this bullshit. Hopefully it'll be decentralized. What you see is when the business is young, like when Bill Gates is sitting in his garage with a couple buddies tinkering around with a circuit board, he's basically a libertarian. He doesn't want the man breathing down his neck with regulations. He doesn't want the man taxing him more. He doesn't want the Uncle Sam or any other government screwing around with him and preventing him from developing something because it's, potentially of military application. No, he wants to be left alone to develop a product and make a lot of money. Once he makes all of that money, he magically becomes an authoritarian. Now he doesn't want other upstarts to do what he did. He wants to make life difficult for them. The problem is that Silicon Valley has escaped normal boundaries that are put in place on corporations. A very small number of brick and mortar corporations control virtually everything you ever consume. It's a few dozen companies that sub-own virtually every brand of good in the country. You do realize that unless it's a local mom and pop store and things are made, pies made from scratch. We cut our own fries after growing our own potatoes locally. You have some stores and co-ops and shit like that. Other than that very small aspect of the economy, it's basically a few corporations. That's how the internet was. Now it's beginning to turn into 6 corporations. The same, which I think is the same number as Control Cable. Apparently Congress really likes the number 6. I do too, but for different reasons. No, Tim Cook shouldn't be telling you what's right or wrong. Yeah, including hate speech bullshit. Look, Tim Cook probably has a rabidly different definition of that than the average sane individual does. Yeah, discourse online becomes a little bit, sometimes there's bullying. Sometimes there are people who say crazy shit. They insult others. There are trolls that only insult others. They've already been there the whole time. Why does Tim Cook care now? Oh, because he wants to squish out smaller competitors. He guaranteed. This is about 2 things. The big Silicon Valley firms fundamentally want to accomplish 2 goals. None of them have to do with preventing violence, preventing bigotry. They're smart enough to know you can't prevent bigotry. You can try to shove it underground, it'll just go elsewhere. It'll go to a site that's based in Thailand or something that operates under some cartel scheme. It'll go onto the dark web. It's still there. It's just out of sight, out of mind. No, what Tim Cook and Bezos and these others want to accomplish, and with Bezos it's a little bit less. I actually like Bezos a little bit more. He has stayed above the fray to some extent, because Amazon's like e-commerce and publishing. It's not really a social media sort of geared system, so he doesn't get compelled to do that bullshit as much. But especially with Tim Cook and Zuckerberg, I'd say, and Jack of Twitter. What they're hoping to accomplish is to destroy alternative voices. That is anything outside of the lamestream, because the lamestream supports the kind of tax schemes that these countries use. The lamestream Republicans and Democrats support the fiscal model exploited by Silicon Valley. That's not really a classically liberal thing to do. No, it's a big business tycoon corporatist thing to do. It verges in on fascism. It's an interventionist system. It's also on the left economically. It's not on the right. It's heavily intervened in at every possible level. It's just misapplied, so mom and pop stores get fucked, and little businesses, some regional chain and entrepreneurs get fucked, and someone who's already made it, they stagnate and they get old and boring. They don't have those problems. They use the tax loopholes and everything else. Number 1, shut down all independent voices when possible. And number 2, shut down alt tech. That is sites that are going to literally begin in the new technological paradigm that's emerging with cryptocurrency and blockchains and decentralized systems in various ways. What's happening is that they're getting nervous because what they're doing is they're looking at alt tech. They're looking at Gab or Minds or BitChute or something, and they see a reflection of themselves 10 years ago. Or 15 years ago, when their companies were young, when these people weren't a bunch of old gray-haired and balding maniacs. They see themselves and they say, wow, it can happen again. You see, they're smart. They got to the top because they noticed reality. A lot of other people are like, well, nobody can ever compete with Facebook. Nobody ever can compete with Twitter. Yes, they can. And Facebook and Twitter know this. That's why they want to crack down on them. And this cable news media, as it watches its own ratings plummet, who do they blame for that? Who's competing them into the ground? Oh, a combination of on-demand that they're constantly arguing to censor more and more and more, in which itself is having problems now because of this fact, and the alt media, people like us, people of the fucking webcam, we're more interesting than they are. I could say fuck. They can on TV. They get fined by the FCC if they say bad words. They can say hell, they can say damn it, they can say poo-poo and pee-pee and things like big boys say. They've basically got a Y7 arrangement there on cable news. No wonder we outcompete them. Oh, it could also be the fact that a bunch of fucking skyscraper-dwelling millionaires are the ones trying to lie to you, just like Tim Cook, multi-billionaire, runs a $1 trillion company. He didn't get that by being honest. He didn't get that by caring about morality. Companies can't care about morality. It's impossible. A corporation that cares about morality, you know what it's called? It's called a bankrupt corporation. And I don't care about that. I don't care how immoral Tim Cook is. But the government must constrain them the same way it constrains others. They've got to pay their fair share, and they need to stop trying to be gatekeepers of free speech. Free speech is a philosophy. The First Amendment is different. That's a writing on a piece of paper that constrains government. And it comes from the philosophy of freedom. The philosophy that people ought to be able to express what they wish to express if they are not defaming, credibly threatening, or inciting violence. Or preventing others from speaking, of course. Spam would fall under that category, botting and things like that. Other than that, you should literally be able to say whatever you want on these platforms. These are corporations. They're meant to make money. Fine, make as much money as you want. The way to make money is not to constantly try to deplatform people. If Congress simply removes the right of these corporations to deplatform people, you get rid of the outrage mob because the outrage mob can no longer function. That's the whole point. That's why we need an Internet Bill of Rights, or we need to do something comparable to it to prevent this from continuing. Tim Cook is not the sort of person you want to listen to with regards to morality, and when he speaks in these soaring terms about how family-friendly and wonderful and activistic Apple will be when it dumbs down all human fucking speech on cell phone networks. When he says these things, he's doing it to sell more crapple products. That's all. He wants your money. And he's damn good at branding Apple so that trust fund babies buy his overpriced bullshit garbage, and he's very good at making all of that green. That's what he cares about. His morality is what is good for Tim Cook's bank account. That's about all. Peace out.